we were no different from other institutions in this part of the country. We were starting to have African Americans on campus, but their reception wasn't as good as it could have been, and their life was limited on this campus then, and they really needed a friend, and we needed to change some of our practices here, flying the Confederate flag, playing Dixie at the ball games, and all these things. What did you see in terms of racial problems, and how did you confront it, and you got any particular memorable events of that?
Well, one quick one was that Coach Trickey, the head basketball coach, had recruited some black players. At that time, we had no black athletes on campus. We hadn't recruited any black football players, but there were black basketball players, and they were concerned because at games, a fraternity wore vests made out of the Confederate flag and brought these huge Confederate flags that they'd wave during the game. And this was demeaning and humiliating to these black basketball players that we had recruited to come here and play, whom we had said would get a good education and be well treated here. And so Trickey and I went around to some of the fraternities that were doing these kind of things in meetings at night and discussed it with them and explained how we felt obligated to these black students to treat them like anybody else and not humiliate them, because they were here because we recruited them to help our basketball program. The flags disappeared and the vests disappeared, and there was never an edict from any administrator that this be done. Students did it voluntarily. And that's the way I think a real university faces problems. At one of the football games very early, Dean McLean, who was at that time Dean of Students, came up to me in the president's box before the game and said that he got word that when the band played Dixie, and our band used Dixie as a fight song. We didn't have another fight song. When the band played Dixie, the black students were going to come out of the stands and protest, and that white fraternity guys were considering confronting them. And here we'd have this confrontation at a football game in front of spectators from the community, and it was a nasty kind of situation. So I asked Bob McLean to ask Joe Smith, who was director of MTSU bands, to not play Dixie that day. Asked him to, and he said he agreed to do it. Not with any great enthusiasm, however, because this was their main enthusiastic song during the game. Then on Monday morning after that weekend, I asked Joe Smith to come in and talk with me about this, and since MTSU had no fight song of its own, no pep song, I said we ought to have one. And so I asked Joe Smith to identify several band composition experts whom he knew, and give them information about our university and ask them to write a pep song specifically for MTSU with its traditions and so forth incorporated. And gave him $3,000, and he gave $1,000 to each of 3 composers who came up with potential fight songs, and one of them seemed especially interesting, and so we invited the cheerleaders and interested faculty, administrators, and other students to come over to the football field where the band played each of these songs, and they unanimously selected the one that we had, and it was terrific, and was then our fight song that was used at all athletic contests. So out of that confrontation came a very good thing.
Well, another thing you found, and I think this happens on every campus, the president's house over a period of time is somewhat neglected because of other financial needs. The president's house needed some work when you moved in.
Could I follow up on the race thing before I get to that?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I thought when you said the president's house, you were leading into this.
Well, the the group coming over serenading you would be part of it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but that comes after an incident.
Okay.
And the incident was a cross burning. We had now, this was a year or two into my presidency, we had now recruited some black athletes, and most of them were housed in an area of a particular dormitory, and some white students, apparently, although they were never identified, put a cross outside the dorm where these black students were, and burned it about 11 o'clock one night. And the black students, of course, saw it and came out in numbers, and as word got around, there were hundreds of black students there, and Bart Gordon, who was then student body president, and Tommy Brown, who was an employee in our student personnel area, been a basketball star and very popular with students, got into the mix, and the black students wanted to go into the dormitory and draw out the supposed white perpetrators and deal with them, but Bart Gordon and Tommy Brown convinced them to go talk to the president about this, and so they did, and I had a call from Bart Gordon telling me what was coming up, and so we heard, my wife and 2 children who were living at home heard this din as the students marched from one end of the campus to the other. Some came in trucks and cars, and then outside the president's home was this huge, very loud group of 300 surely or more black students, and one of them came up and rang the bell, and I went to the door, and he asked me to come out, and that they had something of concern they wanted to talk about. So they told me about the cross burning, and then about other things that had happened that they found humiliating and that smacked of extreme racism. And of course, lots of the things they told me I was unaware of. I wasn't aware that these things were happening. But I listened to them for several hours and made some input from time to time. But at the end of the discussion, at about 2:30 in the morning, and it was kind of cold out there on that porch, I said, in effect, that I would not be president of a university that permitted the humiliation of a segment of its students, and that I was going to do everything I could to find out who did this and to see that action was taken to punish them, and also to develop a better race relations on the campus. And so that seemed to end the night, and they dispersed. And I went on, well, that wasn't enough, I knew, to solve the problem. What I thought was that I had to get to all the campus about this concern, and so I wrote an 8-minute talk in which I discussed race relations and the importance of race relations from many different standpoints, and what a real university would do in regard to this kind of problem, and delivered this talk over the campus radio station, and had Dr. Kirksey given word to the faculty, and we decided to deliver this at 11 o'clock on the busiest class day of the week, and then asked faculty at a given time to turn on radios that they would bring to class to hear this, and then have a little bit of time for faculty to discuss this after the talk was presented. And I made that presentation, and apparently there was some discussion of it, and then I asked the student government to study the problem of race relations on the campus and see if they thought we had major problems, and if so, what solutions might we consider. Asked the faculty senate to do the same, and I don't want to demean the senate, but the senate is generally composed of erudite folks with mighty vocabularies and scholarly abilities, who would tend to discuss and discuss and discuss So what we wound up with was several months of time within which some of us could work individually with the black and whites on campus.
You got 1 minute to finish this up.
Okay, gosh, I'm really going on. At any rate, we worked with people and we got the reports later on, and the black students knew we were exploring this issue and were concerned about them. And so a couple of weeks later was the Christmas holiday, and the night before students were to leave campus, my wife heard this din again, and my daughter looked out and said, "Here they come again." And black students were coming from all directions in trucks and cars, and again they came up and rang the front doorbell and asked me to come out on the porch, and I did. And they started singing Christmas carols, and my wife and children came out there, and it was a real expression of black students. They thought we really were concerned about them, and we're going to try to make things better for them. And
that's where we have to end, Dr. Scarlett. That was a good conclusion. That had a happy ending. This concludes part 2 of our discussion with Dr. Mel Scarlett, who was president of the MTSU from 1968 to 1979. Thank you for watching.